So I do not think the US is going to default on its debt because I don't think Congress is actually going to let the US default. And the reason boils down to who owns the US national debt, who actually owns it. As of 2023, the U.S. national debt stood at approximately $31 trillion, and it's managed by the U.S. Treasury Department. When you break down the U.S. national debt, you can see the two main components. You have intragovernmental holdings, and then you have debt held by the public. Intragovernmental holdings account for about 25% of the total U.S. national debt, and it amounts to approximately $7.8 trillion. This means the government owes itself. The debt is held by various government agencies such as the Social Security Trust Fund, various federal employee retirement funds, etc. These intragovernmental holdings are created when agencies get a surplus of money. They just don't want to put it into a savings account, so they want to invest in something that has a little bit more interest bearing that can grow the account. So they invest in treasury bonds or treasury securities. It also is a great investment into America, so it's self-fulfilling. And what this is it's a government IOU to the government. So when federal employee retirement funds get a surplus, they invest in treasury bonds, and the government owes that employee retirement fund that money. So you have that 25% is in that intragovernmental holdings. The remaining 75% is public debt, which makes up about 23 trillion of the national debt. This category consists of the treasury bonds held by individual people, various businesses, investment groups, even state and local governments. Foreign governments will buy these public treasury bonds. And for that reason, this public debt is divided into two subcategories. You have domestic and foreign holdings. So from a domestic standpoint, the domestic holdings account for approximately 60% of the debt held by the public, which is about $13.8 trillion. Again, this is U.S. citizens, businesses, U.S. governments at the state and local level, all owning treasury bonds. Basically, the U.S. investing in itself. The largest domestic debt holder within this group is private pension funds and mutual funds, various banks, and insurance companies. The Federal Reserve holds around $5 trillion in that debt as well. But again, these are all U.S.-based, U.S. people, U.S. citizens, U.S. businesses owning U.S. debt. So a large portion of the U.S. debt, 70% of it, is owned by the U.S. Now you go to the foreign holdings. Foreign holdings constitute about 40% of the remaining public debt, or about $9 trillion. These are treasury bonds owned by foreign governments, other government countries' central banks, and international investors. Some of the largest foreign debt holders are Japan, China, the United Kingdom, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So of the total debt, the total $31 trillion, roughly 30% is held by foreign entities, whether it's investors or governments. This brings up another thing. So $9 trillion is held by foreign governments. One thing that's for sure is when you own treasury bonds from the U.S., you aren't going to want the U.S., the country you just borrowed from or lent a bunch of money to collapse. Nor do you want to attack them. Holding U.S. debt means that you, other country, want the U.S. to pay the money back with interest. That's the whole reason for investing. You can't do that if the country folds or if you attack that country, which brings me to, once again, China's one of the largest holders of U.S. debt. And it's interesting when I hear people say we're on this warpath. Well, from a business standpoint, that makes zero sense. Now, while 30% and 40% in the foreign debt is absolutely important, we must continue to service it from a diplomacy and global power standpoint, as well as from a future lending standpoint. It is the remaining 70%, as I point to the reason that we won't default. That remaining 70% is the reason that Congress won't actually go through with defaulting on U.S. debt. And if they do, they're extraordinarily foolish. Because that 70% domestic and intragovernmental debt is owed to American companies, American investors, American retirees, basically the American people, as well as members of Congress, members of the government, and on top of that, that intragovernmental debt, you owe money to federal retirement funds, and even in some cases the Social Security Trust Fund. So all of that debt needs to be serviced. And when you default, you're defaulting on the American people, essentially. And if you quickly want to be voted out, mess with people's investments. So when I see blustery default talk, it is all rhetoric. On camera, these politicians can say Joe Biden is irresponsible in managing the debt and show the fancy debt clock graphics and generate anger that is replayed by the media. But the minute you slap your name on a default, an actual default, and people actually don't get paid, you are politically dead. Period. And it's like that video I showed last night, a couple videos ago, and I posted it last night, where it showed that politician, can't remember his name now off the top of my head, out of one of the Carolinas, talking about how in public you have extraordinarily blustery rhetoric, but behind closed doors, they're generally normal people. They're not going to do things that are going to ruin their political career. Sure, they'll come out and say what they are feeling with regard to trying to get more votes. They'll tell Fox News that Joe Biden is ruining this country and look at the debt clock, but they're not going to actually sign a bill or put their name to defaulting on the debt. I mean, behind closed doors, they'll work it out. It'll be worked out. And then when it's all worked out, they'll all come out with their game faces on, outrage abound, and tell the cameras how jacked up the other side is completely. And that's just what happens. So in the end, I don't think that we're going to default on the debt. The U.S. government is just not going to do it because you're defaulting on the American people, and that would cause massive, massive problems for Congress and elected officials. And frankly, you're defaulting on the money that you likely are investing in as well. I mean, I have a government pension that I invest in. So many federal workers and congressmen have that too. So we'll see. We'll see if they actually do it. I just don't think they will.